Zok the Heilige Mishnah. Tam Chata Shanita is ala beged. Now we're learning the halacha that the Torah says as follows: V'chol hakoyne mechata isoi yoichlaim b'mokim kadosh teyochel b'chatzar el moed kol asher yiga b'visor yikdosh v'asher yaze midama ala beged asher yaze ala techabeis b'mokim kadosh. So if dam from a chatos gets on a beged, asher yiza midama ala beged asher yiza ala techabes b'makom kodesh. So the Mishnah tells us that dam chatos shenotas ala beged, dam of the chatos that spritzt on a beged, hareze ton kibus. Now this beged has to be washed out. You cannot leave the dam in the beged. Thank you. Avapi sheina kosef medaber ella b'necholots. Even though what type of is the Torah talking about? Only chatos that are eaten, meaning a regular chatos that's brought on the outside mizbeach. Because that same pasuk that talks about the dam that spritzed on the beged has to be washed out, it says over there, b'makom kadosh teachel. This is a carbon that has to be eaten b'makom kadosh. So obviously we're talking about a type of carbon that's eaten. Nevertheless, echad hanechalos v'echad hapnimiyos. Not only there's a regular chatos that's eaten by the kohen, if its dam goes on the beged, there's a beged have to be washed out. But even the chatos hapnimiyos, like a par held over shal tibur, a par kohen Mashiach, which you spritz the blood on the mizbech hapnimi, and all of the meat is burnt michutz l'machana, even that type of chatos, if it's dam one on a beged, it has to be washed out. Two nois kibus. Shenemar Torah asachatos, Torah achas l'chol hachatos. So instead of learning bits and pieces of this parsha, I think it's kedai to look at all the psukim of the Vayikra related to this parsha, so that it doesn't get confusing. We see them in order, and everything becomes lichtig. Oh, lichtig. The bleed strikes again. Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe lemor, daber el Aharon ve'elbanov lemor. Zois Torah achatos. So Zois Torah achatos. That's what the Mishnah just quoted to include even chatois apnimi. Meaning b'tzafoin lefnei Hashem kodesh kodeshami. Who eats the carbon? So that's how you know what type of chatas we're talking about. A chatas that's eaten. B'makom kodesh teyachel b'chatzar oil moed. Then the pasuk says, "Kol asher yiga b'vsara yikdosh." Whatever touch the basar is kodesh. V'asher yize midama ala beged asher yize aleha techabes b'makom kodesh. You have to wash the beged b'makom kodesh in the azara. That's what our Mishnah's main focus is. But there's another important halach as well. Uchli cheres asher tevush al boy yishaver. The kli cheres in which you cook the meat of the chatos must be broken. And if it was cooked in the chlei nechoshes, umoirak v'shutaf amayim, it needs to be rinsed out, meaning hagala is required. Now, we're going to see in the Gemara, when you read this psukim, you assume that the very same set of karbonas that the halacha of techabes b'mokim kodesh applies to, it's the same set that the halacha of umoirak v'shutaf b'mayim belongs to. We're going to see in the Gemara today that these two halachas might not all apply to the same karbonas. Kol zachar b'kainim yoichel. Who eats the carbon chatos? Male kahanim, kodesh kodeshim he. So you see that the illustration that we're talking about, a chatos that's eaten, is directly after the halacha of umoyak v'shutaf b'mayim, not directly after the chabes b'makom kadosh. Rather, kol zachar b'kayanim yoichel is directly after the pasuk of umoyak v'shutaf b'mayim. V'chol chatos asher yuv midam al oil moed lechaper b'kodesh Lo yachel beish tisarif. That's the famous halacha of dam of achatos that came into the oil moed l'chaper with the intent of making zrika. That carbon becomes possible. So now that we have the parsha in its entirety, it'll be easier to glide through the halachas of the Mishnah and the Gemara. Chatos psula, if the chatos was possible, ein dama to'un kibus, its dam doesn't need kibus, because it says asher yazer, beroy lazah kosav medaber. We're only talking about dam that's going to be spritzed on the mizbeach. That dam, if it goes on a beged, will be tamei. Which means, sai if it's psula, and sai if it's already post zrika, the shirayim. Bein shoytzel l'shasa kosher, bein shaloy l'sasha kosher. That we say that the dam of the chatas psula doesn't have the loch of kibus. It doesn't matter what type of psula was. It doesn't matter if at one point it was kosher for zrika and then it became possible, like it became lom, like it became tamei, or even if it was from a pigel animal that never was mutter to make the zrika on. Either way, this dam does not have to be washed out. We're going to see in the Gemara somebody argues on this. Ezi shahoysel shasa kosher. What's an example of dam that had shasa kosher? Shalona v'shenitma v'sheyatza. Ve'eza hi shahoysel shasa kosher shenishcheda chutz lezmana v'chutz l'mchayma v'shekiblu psulim estama, or if a apostle was mekabel, it's dam. Zok the Gemara. Dam chatos. Frag the Gemara. If the itayr achas l'chalachatois, so dam chatos is referring to the halach in our Mishnah that the beggar needs to be washed out if dam of the chatos hit it. But if tayr achas is including chalachatois, even es she'ein nechalois, even the chatois hapnimiyos, it should also include afilu chatos ha'oif nami. Zois tois achatos to include all chatois. So the dam of a chatos ha'oif that goes on the beggar, it should also need to be washed out. Aloma Tanya, why did we learn in the Brisa that that's not true? Yochol yedam chatos oif ton kibus tavloimer zois toris achatos. Zois is mamayit. So you have zois as a miyut, you have toris achatos as a riboy. How do you know which to be mamayit? How do you know to be mamayit chatos oif and to be marbe chatois apnimis? Amar shlokish b'shabar kapara amar kra tishachet b'nishchatois hakosef medaber. The pasuk says, so it's clear from the parsha of this sugya that we're speaking about karbonos that are shechted, not karbonos that receive malika. So that's how we know that the parsha is not talking about chatas oif. Frek the Gemara, but we have another pasuk that says asher toichal. So if you're gonna say it only applies to the case directly referenced in the psukim, well, then I can argue that the chatois hapanimi shouldn't have this halacha because they're not nechalos. So no, the reason why we ignore the nechalos is because Rabbi Rachmana Teiras. Freit the Gemara, if you can use Teiras even to overrule a detail that the Torah tells us, so let it overrule the deal of Tishachet. The detail of Tishachet. No, for that you have meat Rachman the Zois. So now for Umar Rois. You have a ribu, you have a meat. How do you know what to apply the ribu to and what to apply the meat to? So Mistaver the Chatos Behema Pnimiois Havale Ribuye. It's more mistaber if we have to be marba one of the two to be marba the Chatos of Pnimiois, because they have many similarities. Number one, Shekain Behema. They're both Behemos, not Oifos. That's the obvious. One. Ushchita. They both get shchita and not malika, which is really a feature of being a behema. They both need betzafin. We know that the malika of a chatas oif is not betzafin. They both need kabbalah's kli. The dam has to be niskabel in the keli. By the chatas oif, it's just squeezed straight from the bird onto the mizbeach. And they both need keren. They both of the damim of the chatas apnimi as well as the chatas achitzoini, the dam is placed on the keren, and the etzba used with a finger of the coin, the chuda, and on the tip of the keren, the ishim and the meat is burnt on the mizbeach. A chatas ha'oif doesn't have any of these things. Sagt Gemara, but adrabah, there are things that a chatas ha'oif as similar with a behema chitzoni that the pnimi doesn't have. Chatas ha'oif, adrabah chatas ha'oif have a little buya shekein chutz kamoisa. First of all, it's a carbon that stays, the dam stays outside in the Zohar, it doesn't go to the Hegel, unlike the Pnimi. V'achila kamoisa, and it's eaten by the Kahanim. When we know the Chatas HaPnimi is not eaten by the Kahanim at all. Zok Gemara, Hanach Nefishin. There are many more similarities to the Chatas HaPnimi than there are to the Oif, and therefore we use the Riboy to be marbe, the Chatos HaPnimi, Toyos HaChatos, and the Zois to be Mamayit Oif. Rabbi Yosef Amar Kra, the pasuk says Yoichlena lezu v'loy la'acheres b'necholois hakosav medaber. B'necholois. Rabbi Yosef says that it says Yoichlena lezu v'loy la'acheres. Yoichlena, it should be eaten. It's mashma that only one of those chatois that are eaten has this rule, not all of them. Right? Yoichlena lezu v'loy la'acheres b'nechalos miyat hakosav. When the Torah is being memayit a chatos from this rule, it's being memayit a chatos that's eaten. He says Yoichlena, this one is this one that you eat. After this one chatos that's eaten has this halacha, but not other chatos that are eaten would share this halacha. For instance, the chatos ha'oif. For the Gemara, if Yoichlena in and of itself tells you that we're being memayit chatas ha'oif ve'la zois lamali, so why do I need zois to be memayit chatas ha'oif? I have Yoichlena to do that. Zok Gemara, because he loves zois. If we didn't have the meat of zois, havamina Yoichlena is urchei dekra. It doesn't really mean to be memayit. It's just that all of the expressions in these psukim are all b'loshen yochid, as Rashi speaks out. Shekola inyam b'loshen zenemar tishachet hachatos b'visara midama. It's all speaking about an individual korban, so to speak. So maybe Yoichlena is just sticking with the same loshen used throughout. Kamash malon, the zois that we're talking about a miyat, and what is it being memayit? Obviously, a type of carbon that's also nechalos. That's shot number one, that the main pasuk is talking about a chatos achitzoni, a chatos anechelos. From the Torah achatos, we're being me'arbed a chatos ha'pnimi, and from the zois, we're being memayit the chatos ha'oif. Rabbah turns the whole thing over on its head. Rabbah Amar Kra Asher Yazer. The pasuk is not talking primarily about a regular chatos of a behema that you bring outside. No, the pasuk is primarily talking b'davka about a chatos ha'pnimi. How do I know? Because it says in these psukim as well, Asher Yizeh, that you spritz b'hazois hakosav medaber. We're speaking about a carbon when we're talking about the halacha that the blood that gets on a beged has to be washed out. We're talking about beged that's spritzed. You don't spritz the dam of a regular chatos. You touch the keren with your finger that has dam on it. Atakal zrika. Zrika means from a distance. You know where there's a zrika? By the chatois hapnimiyas, because you're zorik on the paroiches. So Omar Kra Asher Yazeh Ba'azois HaKosav V'daber. Look at Rashi. Rab Omar Hai Pircha the Pirchas Dilma Pnimiyas Nismaitu Memiyuta the Zois Fakert. The main pasuk is talking about pnimiyos. Iker kibus be pnimiyos ksiv. Dasher Yazeh bin Nizois HaKosav V'daber. The primary target that the pasuk is referring to when it teaches us this halacha is a carbon that has a spritzing. Behind the pnimiyos. That only applies to a chatos ha'pnimi. Ksiv bein hazo ala paroiches. Avo b'chitzoyno is ein ksiv hazo. But a chatos ha'chitzoyno, you just touched with your finger the carrot. That's not spritzing. You don't spritz it from a distance. The chitzoyno is who does rabbi b'teres. So it's boom for carrot. The pasuk is talking about pnimiyos. Don't ask me why we're being memayit chatos oif and not pnimiyos. We're talking about pnimiyos. We're being marba chatos ha'chitzoyni. So now you might want to ask me, why are you going to be marba chatas hachitzoni and not chatas oif? Because panimi is the main one. So we'll get to that in a second. So Rabbi Amar Krash Yasam no Badais Akasam Medaber. Break the Gemara. Vatana Afapi Sheina Akasam Medaber Elabin Achalois. Didn't the Mishnah? Doesn't the Mishnah say Sheina Akasam Medaber Elabin Achalois? And the Chatois Apnimis are not Nachalois. So Gemara leInyan Murika Ushtifa. As I pointed out in the pasuk, when it says Teachel, that's right after the pasuk of a Marika Ushtifa. Marika Ushtifa is primarily, the pasuk is talking about Chatois HaChitzonos. But when it's talking about Asher Yazim Yidam Techabeis, that's speaking about carbonis that require Hazoya. Although the Yikibos Asher Yaziksid. So now when you're looking at the psukim, it seems like one uniform parsha talking about one carbon with two halachas. Now we're saying it's two separate things. There's the halacha of Hazoya that's primarily said by Chatois HaPnimiyos, and there's the halacha of Kibos, and there's a halacha of Murak B'Shutaf B'Mayim that's talking primarily about Chatois HaNachalos. Frank the Gemara, Ihachi, the Mishnah says, Echad HaNachalos v'Echad HaPnimiyos. That's what our Mishnah says. Not only does it apply to Nachalos, it also applies to Pnimiyos, which has a connotation that the primary focus of the parsha is Nachalos, and we're adding Pnimiyos through a limud of Torah Sachatos. That's not what our Mishnah should say. If the primary focus of the halach is on Pnimiyos, the Mishnah should have said, Echad HaPnimiyos v'Echad HaNachalos mi boy. That's what it should have said. So okay, we'll amend. Tani Echad HaPnimiyos v'Echad HaNachalos. So then, break the Gemara. Now we're back to the same question. If the main pasuk is speaking about Chatois HaPnimiyos, and you're being marbe through Torah Sachatos, even Achatos HaChitzoni, and you're being memayit a zois from zois to oif, maybe flip it around. Yochi chatas oif nami. Zok Gemara, no, mit rachmana zois. Frank Gemara, if you have zois as a miut, maybe apply to Achatos HaChitzoni. Yochi chitzoni nami loy. Zok Gemara, no, for that, riba rachmana Torahs. So we have the same question as we had earlier. Umaroyas. Mistavra chatos behema hava lele rebuye. The chatos behema is most similar to the chatos hapnimi. Shekein behema, shchitas, tzofoin, the kabbalas kli, the keren, the etzba, the chuda, the ishim. All the same similarities we listed earlier. Adirabba chatas oif hava lele rebuye. Shekein hazah kamoisa. It doesn't even have nechaloiser. Only hazah kamoisa. Gemara Hanach Nefishin. There are many more similarities from Behema to Behema than from the Pnimi to the Chatas Hoif. So now we have two Mahalchim. We have two Mahalchim in how you know that the halacha applies of Kibus only applies to Chatos of Behemis, even Chitzoni, even Pnimi, and not the Oif. What there seems to be a little bit of a difference between these two Pshatim is that according to Rabba's Pshat, the halacha of a mark v'shuta famayim is said primarily by the chatas hapnimi, but the chatas hachitzoni, that is. I'm not sure if that has an impact on where it applies. But at least the main focus of the pasuk of umark v'shuta famayim is by a regular chatas. Boy Ravavin. Ravavin had the following shaila. Chatas ha'oif she'chinis dama b'tzavara b'fnim. We know we have a pasuk in this parsha that if the dam of achatos comes into the heichal lichaper, it becomes pasuk. Now that's if it comes in a keli that you were makabel the dam from the neck of the animal. But by achatos oif, the zrika is not. You never makabel the dam in a keli. The bird itself is squished, and the dam squirts out of the bird on the mizbeach. So what if you took the bird itself into the azara, would it passel? Now, do you say tzavar kechli shari stamli, and therefore umivsel, just like the dam of any other chatas? Idilma ketzavar behema, it's like the neck of the behema. Now you cannot make a zrika yet from the neck of the behema. Midama amar achmana veloy bisara. The Torah that says that if some of the dam of the chatas goes into the heichal with pasel, that's if it's dam. But this is not dam, this is basar. It's the whole animal that you took in. Maybe it wouldn't have that psul. Zok Gemara Tashma. Pirchasa v'nichnisa lefnim. Here we're talking about Rashi defines that we're talking about Bechata Sa'oif Katanu. So you have a Chata Sa'oif after Malika, that the bird jumped around and it walked into the Azara. V'chazra, and then it came back out of the Azara. Sheira, it's kosher. Now, Rashi says, V'kasol Kadaitach, Mishum de Me'elea Nichnisa. The reason why it's Sheira is because it went in by itself. And the reason why it doesn't passel is because, like the pasuk says, it's only passel if the kohen takes it in with the intention of making the zrika there. As it says lachaper b'kodesh. So will maybe daik hachnisa, if a kohen brought it in, then it will be psula. So this will be poshet our shaila, that even though the dam was not in the keli, it was in the goof of the bird, it still becomes passel if it comes into the hell. Frag the Gemara, Pirchas of a nichnas of the flim, the chazruk shera is lav dafka. It doesn't mean if it was Pirchas of one in or if a person brought it in. Your deek is faulty. And I'll prove to you that your deek is faulty from another brisa that uses similar language, and therefore sure you know the deek is faulty. The katani, Pirchas of a yotzaladorim. This already is talking about a behemoth. This is already talking about a behemoth. So you have a behemoth. I think I'm saying right. Pirchas of a yotzaladorim. It was mefarchis and it went to the durham. I believe the reason why you might say there's a problem is because it's supposed to be shechted b'tzofein. B'chazra, and it came back. Kshera, that will still be a kosher or carbon. Now, this whole thing is lavdafka, because where does it say after you shecht the animal, it can't call the durham? There's no problem with it. So you see it's lavdafka. Ha'itzia psula, are you going to make such a diuk that after you shechted an animal, a carbon that needed shechita b'tzofein, if you physically took it to the durham, you'll be possible yotzei? Of course not. There's no problem whatsoever. Taking it out of the azara maybe, but taking it out of the tzofein, there's no such thing. So clearly, this first case is lavdafka. Ella hai yotza lechutas shrichale. It's only because the safe of this brisa, as well as the brisa of oif, poses another case. Dovetails into another case. What if it was perchasa and yotza lechutz lazara? There we say it's psula, it's strichle. Hachanami yotza lechutas strichle in the case of the oif, but perchas of nichlas alfim v'chazuk shera. It doesn't matter if it went by itself or if you brought it. Either way, it would be covered. Therefore, you don't have a raya to our shaila. So once again, we remain with the shaila. If the bird is taken in with its dam into the heichal, would it pass? And the Gemara does not push that shaila. So we're on to the next shaila. Boy Ravavan nishpach ala ritzpa v'osfa. What if the dam fell on the ritzpa and you gathered it up? Now you know if the dam fell on the ritzpa, there was no kabbalah in the kli by a behema, the dam is possible. If you were makabel in the kli, and after it was in the keli, it spilled, then you could gather it up. But the bird's blood that never goes into a keli, what if it fell on the floor and you gathered it up? Mao atzruche hudeloy atzruche rachamona klisharis. The Torah never requires that it has to be in the klisharis. So there's no problem if it goes on the floor. Gather it up. V'hilchach oisvay v'kasher. Oidilma mivsil posel be'rachmana klisharis. Fakert. If you put the dam of a knife into a klisharis, it would passel the dam. Because these rika, the Torah's makbid, should be dafka directly from the goof of the animal. And therefore, v'hilchach oisvay posel, because it's no longer directly from the goof of the animal. So the question is that the oif goes directly from the goof of the animal onto the mizbeach. Is that a kula that you don't need a keli? Or is that dafka? No, the keli that the Torah is designating is dafka directly from the kuf of the oif. Amar Rav Toshma, Yochol yehi dam chatas oif ton kibos. You would have thought that the dam chatas oif needs kibos. Talmud loimer zois. Frag the Gemara. V'yisol gadaitach mifsil posel be'rachmona. If you hold that when the dam doesn't go directly from the oif, from the body of the oif onto the mizbeach, it's not dam that's kosher to make zrika with. Well, if it went onto a beged, it's possible. Because and even before it gets into the beged, it's possible. When it's even airborne over the beged, it's going to be possible. Because now it's no longer in the gufa oif. Now it's already like in the beged already. So typically, the moment that it was hovering over the beged about to fall on the beged, it was inevitable that it was going to be falling on the beged, it's possible already. It's like it's in the keli, and that passes it. So of course there would be no such psul of there'd be no such chiv of kibus, because kibus is only on dam that's kosher to make zrika. So there's no mitzias of dam that could be kosher for zrika. So then why would I need a pasuk to be memayit chatas or oif? It would be technically impossible to have such a scenario. Amar Afud Rabbi Yeshua, what are you talking about? B'madlik kli, b'madbik kli b'savara. Who said it dripped out and it fell into the beged? What if you literally wiped off dam from the bird onto the beged? There it was dam kosher. Yes, once it got into the beged, it's possible. But before it got into the beged, it was kosher. So that's where I need the pasuk of zois to be b'mayit achatasai. Boy min Levi. And the Shida Mekabetz asks, who did he ask from? So the Shida Mekabetz, I think, says, Boy min Levi may Rebbe. Levi asked his kasha from Rebbe, Nitas mi beged lebeged. What if dam spritzed into one beged? And then it went from beged number 1 to beged number 2. Mahu mi beged kamo itchilei lekibus. Do you say that once it got into the first beged, it's no longer dam kosher, and therefore it does not require a din kibos? So this is not talking about a bird, right? It's talking about the dam that was in the keli, that was kosher for zrika. It splashed onto one beged, and then it splashed from that beged onto another beged. So do you say once it was in beged number 1, now it's already needs kibos, so it's possible already. So when it went into the second beged no longer requires kibos. Oidil maloi, or maybe both begodim will require kibus. As Rashi says, it's worse than nishbach al ritzba v'asvai v'arach nitzel beged. You know why? The house of keeping the kosher is rika roy lazar karinabei. If you picked it up the floor and now you have it back in the keli again, that's considered kosher as rika. But once it went on the first beged, it's no longer kosher as rika. Aval ala beged this kuke iskik lekibos. Now it needs to be washed out with detergent. You got to get it out. You got to get the stain out. So this is no longer going to be dam that you can possibly use. And therefore, like karini be roy lazara, and maybe boy kibos hayachroy. Maybe the second beged should not require kibos. Amalei, so Rabbi answered zu shayla. That's a good question. Du fragst a good shayla. Yofa shalta v'ashiva chala, but I'll give you a good tshuva. Ton kibos. It needs kibos. Mimanasha. The kosher hakosher. If you squeeze the blood out of there, it would be kosher. So Zok Rashi, the kosher. The alpagav this takak lekibos. Yes, right now it needs kibos, but loibotel b'tayis dam kol man shalei kibsai till the kibos actually occurs. Right now it's still dam absorbed in the beged. So when it's absorbed in the beged, it should be no different than if it was spilled on the floor. If you squeezed it out, you could make a zrika with it, hakosher, and therefore it was kosher dam that went into the second beged, and therefore baton ha'acharon kibos. The oisvayu pasul, and if you hold that once you gather it up, it will become pasul. Why? So kadaitach which of the huskak lakibos bottle b'teres dam. Once it's already destined to be washed out. Now we say it doesn't have a din dam anymore, because when you watch it, it won't become dam. It'll be ois dam. I'm not Rabbi Kiva spherely. I hold like Rabbi Kiva, who argues on our Mishnah. The Amar Hoysel Shasa Kosher v'Nifsala Dama Ton Kibos. Rabbi Kiva holds that v'balt this dam had a shas hakosher. Before it spilled, it was royal zrika. Even though now it's possible because it was in beged A, it doesn't matter. Once the dam had a shas hakosher, even possible dam requires kibos. Our Mishnah says if it became possible, it doesn't matter if it has a shas hakosher or not. Regardless, it doesn't need kibos. But Rabbi Kiva, we're going to see tomorrow, argues on our Mishnah and holds that if it had a shas hakosher, even though it's dam possible now, it will still be kibos. So therefore, and that is the tshuva of Rebbe to Levi's Kasha. Tomorrow we will learn Daf Tzadik Kibbutz.